They will not clap for you. They will not defend you. And when you fall, they will not even look surprised. That is the moment most people break. Not because they are weak, but because they were raised on a lie. The lie that effort earns loyalty. That goodness attracts allies. That if you do things the right way, someone will eventually stand beside you. But what happens when no one does? What happens when every room you walk into feels colder, every conversation feels calculated, and every opportunity seems to slip into someone else's hands? Not because they are better, but because they are backed, protected, supported. This is where most people hesitate. They wait. They hope. They try to win people over. They soften themselves, thinking approval is a strategy. It isn't. And this is where Machiavelli begins. Not in comfort, not in fairness, but in the brutal understanding that power does not wait for permission, and survival does not depend on being music-liked. When no one is on your side, you are no longer playing a social game. You are playing a strategic one. And the first rule of that game is this: stop music expecting rescue, because the expectation of support is the quietest form of weakness. It blinds you. It slows your decisions. It makes you hesitate when speed is the only advantage you have left. The moment you accept that no one is coming, something shifts. The noise disappears. The illusions dissolve. And for the first time, you start seeing people as they actually are. Not as friends, not as enemies, but as variables. Machiavelli never believed in loyalty as a foundation. He observed something far more unsettling. People are loyal only as long as it serves them. The second it doesn't, they change. Not always dramatically, sometimes subtly. A delayed response, a missed opportunity, a quiet withdrawal, and by the time you realize it, you are already alone. But here's the advantage hidden inside that realization. If loyalty is conditional, then so is betrayal. And if both are conditional, then both can be predicted. That's where your power begins. Most people react emotionally when they feel unsupported. They complain. They isolate. They internalize the rejection. But Machiavelli would argue that emotion in this context is a liability. Because while you are feeling abandoned, others are calculating. So instead of asking, why is no one helping me, you start asking, what do they gain by not helping me? That question changes everything, because now you're no longer the victim of circumstance. You're the analyst of it. You begin to notice patterns. The people who ignore you aren't indifferent. They're invested elsewhere. The opportunities you're excluded from aren't random. They're controlled. The silence around you isn't empty. It's strategic. And once you see that, you stop trying to break into systems that were never designed for you. You build your own. But building your own path when no one supports you requires something most people never develop: internal authority, not confidence. Confidence is fragile. It depends on results, on validation, on external signals. Internal authority is different. It is the ability to act decisively without consensus, without reassurance, without applause. It is the ability to move forward even when every signal around you suggests you shouldn't. Machiavelli understood that those who rise without support often rise faster because they are not bound by expectations. They are not trying to maintain approval. They are not negotiating their identity with others. They are free to be precise. And precision is lethal in a world where most people are distracted. When no one is on your side, your margin for error shrinks. You cannot afford sloppy decisions. You cannot afford emotional reactions. You cannot afford to reveal your intentions too early. So you become disciplined. You speak less but observe more. You reveal less but understand more. You stop trying to be understood and instead focus on understanding, because understanding is control, and control, even in small amounts, compounds. This is another truth Machiavelli would emphasize. Music power is rarely taken in one dramatic move. It is accumulated quietly through small advantages that others overlook. A piece of information here, a relationship there, a moment of timing, a calculated silence. While others are chasing recognition, you are collecting leverage, and leverage does not need approval. It operates in the background, shaping outcomes before anyone realizes what's happening. But to reach that level, you must eliminate one dangerous habit: the need to prove yourself. When no one is on your side, the instinct is to show them what they're missing. To demonstrate your value, to make them regret overlooking you. This is a trap because the moment you start performing for recognition, you give others control over your direction. You start optimizing for their attention instead of your own advantage. Machiavelli would see this as a fatal mistake. He would say, never depend on the validation of those who have already dismissed you, not because they are incapable of recognizing your worth, but because by the time they do, it will already be too late for them to matter. Instead, you operate differently. You move in silence. You build in obscurity. You sharpen your edge where no one is watching. And when you finally appear, you don't ask for space. You take it. This is the paradox of isolation. It feels like a disadvantage, but it removes the very constraints that hold others back. No expectations, no obligations, no need to maintain an image, just pure focused movement. But there is a cost, because walking this path means accepting something most people avoid. You will be misunderstood. Your intentions will be questioned. Your silence will be interpreted as arrogance. Your distance will be seen as detachment. And your success, when it comes, will be attributed to anything but your strategy. This is inevitable. Machiavelli warned that those who act differently from the masses will always be judged by them, not because they are wrong, but because they are unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity makes people uncomfortable. So they label it, they criticize it, they resist it, but none of that matters unless you let it. Because the moment you start adjusting your strategy to fit their perception, you lose the only advantage you had, independence. So you accept the misunderstanding. You let them talk. You let them guess. You let them underestimate you. Because underestimation is one of the most powerful positions you can hold. When no one expects you to win, they stop defending against you. When no one believes in you, they stop watching you closely. And when no one is on your side, they assume you have no side at all. That assumption is your cover, and under that cover, you move. Not recklessly, not emotionally, but deliberately. Because at this stage, everything you do must serve a purpose. Every action must either increase your capability, expand your influence, or strengthen your position. There is no room for random effort, no space for wasted energy. This is where discipline becomes your closest ally, not motivation, not inspiration. Discipline, the ability to do what is necessary, regardless of how it feels. Because when no one is supporting you, you cannot rely on external momentum. You have to generate your own. And that is exhausting. There will be moments when stopping feels easier, when giving in feels justified, when the idea of continuing without recognition, without support, without certainty, feels irrational. But this is where most people fail, not because they lack ability, but because they lack endurance. Machiavelli understood that time is one of the most underestimated forces in strategy. Those who can endure longer, think clearer, and adapt faster eventually outmaneuver those who rely on immediate advantages. So while others burn out chasing quick wins, you build something slower but stronger, something that does not collapse under pressure, something that does not depend on approval, something that cannot be easily taken away. And over time, something begins to change. Not around you, but within you. You stop feeling alone, not because people suddenly join you, but because you no longer need them to. You stop seeking reassurance. You stop questioning your direction. You stop waiting for permission. And in that state, something rare emerges, self-sufficiency. Not the kind that isolates you from others, but the kind that makes you immune to their absence. At that point, the game shifts again because now you are no longer trying to survive without support. You are learning how to win without it. And that is a completely different level of power. Before we continue, if you're finding truth in this so far, I'd appreciate a like. And if you want to hear from me again, make sure you're subscribed. Let's keep going. Now, once you reach that level, something dangerous begins to happen. Not to you, but to everyone around you. They start to notice. Not immediately, not in some dramatic reveal, but subtly, almost reluctantly. The same people who overlooked you begin to sense a shift they can't fully explain. Your presence feels different. Your decisions seem sharper. Your movements carry a kind of certainty that doesn't ask for agreement. And this is where most people make their next mistake. They soften. They think, now that I've proven myself, maybe things will change. Maybe now they'll support me. Maybe now I can relax. But Machiavelli would warn you, This is the most vulnerable moment of all because attention is not the same as allegiance. Just because people are watching you does not mean they are with you. In fact, the moment you become visible without having secured your position, you become a target. This is the transition most people fail to understand. Going from ignored to noticed feels like progress, but it is actually exposure. And exposure without control invites interference. So instead of opening up, you tighten your strategy. You don't reveal more, you reveal less. You don't explain your moves, you refine them. You don't celebrate prematurely. You observe who is reacting, how they are reacting, and why. Because reactions reveal more than words ever could. Some will show curiosity, some will show interest, and some will show resistance. It's that last group you must pay attention to, not because they are your enemies in the obvious sense, but because they represent something more subtle, threat perception. Machiavelli understood that people rarely oppose you out of pure dislike. They oppose you when your growth begins to interfere with their position, their influence, or their control. So when resistance appears, don't take it personally. Analyze it. Where is it coming from? What are they protecting? What do they stand to lose if you continue rising? Because the answers to those questions reveal the structure of the environment you are operating in. And once you understand the structure, you can navigate it. This is where strategy becomes less about effort and more about placement. Most people think success is about doing more. More work, more noise, more visibility. But when no one is on your side, doing more without direction only makes you easier to predict. And predictability is weakness. So instead, you focus on positioning. Where you apply your effort matters more than how much effort you apply. Where you show up matters more than how often you show up. And who you allow access to, you matters more than how many people know you. Because access is power. Machiavelli would argue that controlling access is one of the most effective ways to shape perception and influence outcomes. When you are always available, always visible, always responding, you become easy to read and easier to manipulate. But when music, your presence is selective, when your responses are measured, when your availability is limited, you create something far more valuable than attention. You create intrigue, and intrigue shifts the dynamic. Now people are not just observing you, they are trying to understand you. And the less predictable you are, the more control you gain. But this is not about being mysterious for the sake of it. It's about being intentional. Every move you make should have a purpose beyond music, the immediate outcome. Every decision should consider not just what it achieves now, but how it positions you next. Because winning without support is not a single moment. It's a sequence. A series of calculated steps where each move strengthens the next. And this requires something most people resist: delayed gratification. You will have opportunities to take shortcuts, moments where you can gain quick recognition by aligning with people who previously ignored you, situations where compromising your strategy could bring immediate comfort. And this is where discipline is tested at a deeper level, because now it's not about pushing forward in isolation. It's about choosing not to fall back into dependence. Machiavelli would see these moments as traps disguised as rewards. Because the moment you start relying on those who once withheld support, you place yourself back into their control structure. You become predictable again, negotiable again, replaceable again. So instead, you maintain your independence even when it feels unnecessary, especially when it feels unnecessary, because that is when it matters most. At the same time, you begin to understand something else. Being alone does not mean staying alone. This is a distinction that changes everything. When no one is on your side, you are forced to operate independently. But as you grow, as you build leverage, as you become more capable, you gain the ability to choose your alliances instead of needing them. And that shift from needing to choosing is where real power begins. But Machiavelli would caution you here as well. Not alliances are equal, and not all support is beneficial. In fact, the wrong alliance can be more dangerous than isolation. Because when you are alone, your risks are visible. You know your limitations. You understand your vulnerabilities. But when you align with the wrong people, your risks become hidden. You start trusting structures you don't fully control. You start relying on intentions you haven't fully verified. And by the time you realize the cost, it's already embedded in your position. So instead of asking who will support me, you ask, A different question: whose interests align with mine and for how long? Because alignment is temporary, and understanding its duration is just as important as recognizing its existence. This is where emotional thinking becomes dangerous again, because the moment you start viewing alliances as friendships, you blur the lines between strategy and sentiment. And Machiavelli was clear about this. Sentiment has its place, but not at the cost of survival. So you learn to separate the two. You can respect someone without depending on them. You can collaborate without trusting blindly. You can work with others without losing control of your direction. And this balance is what allows you to expand without becoming vulnerable. Because now you are not building connections out of need. You are forming them out of calculation, not manipulation, but awareness. A clear understanding of what each side gains, what each side risks, and what each side is likely to do when circumstances change. Because they will change. They always do. And the person who anticipates that change is the one who stays ahead. But even with all of this strategy, discipline, positioning, there is still one element that determines whether you win or not. Clarity. Not clarity of goals in the superficial sense, but clarity of reality. The ability to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. To recognize when a path is no longer working. To admit when a strategy needs to evolve. Music to accept when something or someone has outlived its usefulness in your journey. This is one of the hardest things to do when you've built everything alone, because when you've fought for every inch, letting go feels like loss. But Machiavelli would argue that holding on to the wrong things is a greater loss because it locks you into outdated positions while the world around you shifts. And those who fail to adapt don't just fall behind, they become irrelevant. So you stay flexible. Not uncertain, but adaptable. Not reactive, but responsive. You don't cling to one identity, one method, one way of operating. You evolve quietly, consistently, relentlessly. And as you do, something else becomes clear. Winning when no one is on your side is not just about external success. It's about internal transformation. You think differently. You move differently. You evaluate differently. The things that once bothered you no longer matter. The opinions that once influenced you no longer register. The need for validation fades into something almost unrecognizable, and in its place something far more stable emerges. Control. Not control over everything, but control over yourself, your decisions, your reactions, your direction. And that kind of control is rare because most people, even those surrounded by support, are still dependent. Dependent on approval, dependent on guidance, dependent on reassurance. But you are not. And that difference is what separates those who rise temporarily from those who build something lasting. Because when conditions change, and they always do, those who rely on others hesitate. They wait for instructions. They look for consensus. They slow down. But you don't, because you never had that luxury to begin with. You move decisively, strategically, without needing permission. And in that movement, you create momentum. Momentum that is not tied to anyone else's belief in you. Momentum that does not collapse when support disappears. Momentum that carries you forward regardless of who stands beside you or who doesn't. And eventually something almost ironic happens. The same absence that once felt like a disadvantage becomes your greatest advantage. Because while others are negotiating relationships, maintaining images, and protecting their positions, you are focused on one thing: progress uninterrupted, unrestricted, unapologetic. And that is when you realize something most people never do. Winning when no one is on your side was never about enduring isolation. It was about becoming the kind of person who no longer depends on sides at all. Because once you reach that point, you are no longer playing the game the way everyone else is. You are operating on a level where support is optional, opposition is manageable, and outcomes are shaped not by who stands with you, but by how precisely you move through everything that stands against you.